Greetings and welcome to you all. My name is Connie Keith and I am the chairperson of the Balcombe Heights Estate Committee. For those of you that are unaware, I am standing before the World War I Soldier Memorial, which heads a memorial avenue of trees at Balcombe Heights Estate. The trees and memorial commemorate the 364 Australian Masons who gave their lives in World War I. Each year since 2008, the Balcombe Heights Estate Committee, in partnership with Council, has hosted the annual Remembrance service at this memorial on the Sunday immediately before the November 11. On a few occasions, the service has been followed by an open day and festivities. Due to the length of the lockdown time and sustained in Sydney and the uncertainty of when it would end, this year for the first time we have not been able to invite you to a live remembrance service. We invite you instead to participate in the service remotely via the video presentation of last year's service. Many in the community have little knowledge of the significant history of this estate. It was opened on November 11, 1922 as the William Thomson Masonic School. Its purpose was the care and education of the children of deceased Freemasons. From its time of opening, it cared for and gave a start in life to over 2,300 orphans. There are two other memorials on this site, as well as this soldier memorial. One is a tablet commemorating the World War II period between 1942 and 1945, during which the children were moved out and the site became the 103rd Australian General Hospital. The second is a World War II memorial with the names of ex-students of this school who gave their lives in World War II and the Vietnam War. By the 1970s, needs had changed and the site was sold to the then Balcombe Hills Shire Council and renamed as the Balcombe Heights Estate. This site has a great community focus. The now heritage listed buildings are occupied by a large number of community-based, not-for-profit and charitable organisations. They provide many important services as well as recreational opportunities across a wide range of age groups. In addition, sporting teams use the two ovals, and other parts of the grounds. The community is further served by the availability of a picnic and barbecue area, children's playground, a skate park and a dog park. Next year, November 11, 2022, will be the centenary of the opening of this site. Our plan is to hold the Remembrance service on the Sunday, the 6th of November. Following it, we plan to celebrate the centenary by hosting a substantial event for the community. This is an early invitation for you to join us for the service and the celebration. Mark that date, Sunday, November the 6th of 2022. I now invite the Hills Shire Mayor, Dr. Michelle Byrne, to give an address. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michelle Byrne, Mayor of the Hills Shire Council. Today we gather to pay our respects to those who went to war and did not return, those who did return and carried the physical, mental and emotional scars of battle, and to the families and to the communities that experienced loved ones who have served in our armed forces. This year marks the 103rd anniversary of Remembrance Day, a day that signalled the end of World War I on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. This war would take a devastating toll on Australia after more than 62,000 lives, both men and women, were lost, and a further 156 people were wounded, gassed or taken prisoner at a time when our population stood just under 5 million people. Many of those who enlisted were young men who were motivated to serve for loyalty, duty to the Empire, and as well as a sense of adventure. More courageously, these men and women were prepared to sacrifice themselves to protect our freedom, beliefs, and the quality of life that we enjoy to this very day. While COVID-19 has made it difficult to come together and commemorate our defence personnel, both past and present, I hope this online ceremony reminds you of the courageous spirit, valour and mateship was forged in the trenches and on the battlefields of the First World War in our own fight against COVID-19. Those values and kind acts of generosity is what will get us through this particular challenging time, and we are very fortunate to have great role models like those who have served our nation so selflessly to inspire us to go above and beyond. Please continue to be inspired, be encouraged, and never let these treasured heroes and their legacy be forgotten, lest we forget.
I'd now like to call on Worshipful Brother Neville Eric Menzies to take the podium to address you. Thank you.
Your Honour, Dr. Michelle Burns, Hills Shire District Mayor, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning everybody. Thank you Mrs Connie Keith for inviting me along here this morning, and I'd like to just congratulate you on being able to have this wonderful group of people together under such trying circumstances that we have had. And after the day's over, I hope you can have a very good, well-earned rest.
Thank you.
The Grand Master has honoured me again by requesting I represent him and the Masons of New South Wales today. It's always an honour to represent the Grand Master, but to me, it is more special today, again, as I am an ex-pupil of these Masonic schools, having been a resident here in the late 40s and early 50s. Our numbers, as those of the returned servicemen and women of all wars whom we are honouring today, are thinning down. Coming here in my capacity, or any capacity, has a personal feeling to me as coming home. May I just deviate a little and recognise the presence of our immediate past Grand Master, Most Worshipful Brother Jamie Melville. Thank you, sir, for being with us today. Today we are commemorating Remembrance Day, the day in which World War I ceased after 4 years bitter fighting and enormous loss of life, both military and civilian. In thinking of what to say, I thought I might speak a little on that matter, and then decided that perhaps Dr. Michelle and the Colonel would do that more ably than I, and it's already been seen by listening to Michelle. Thank you for that. Remembrance Day commemorations began to honour those who paid the supreme sacrifice during those terrible years. It has expanded and embraced those of all conflicts, as has done Anzac Day. We are here to honour all who died and suffered in one of the thousands of ways in World War I and several other conflicts, and many in the years that followed. I feel that as you have invited us as Masons to be part of this commemoration, it is fitting that I, in representing them, should relate to many Masons who participated in World War I, the many who fell, and the many more who experienced sufferings in some way or from the events of World War I, World War II, and those events prior to and subsequent conflicts. Masons have been only a very small part of the thousands who enlisted and served in the various forces, but they played a very significant part. Many organisations, churches, religious groups, schools, clubs, police, firemen, ambulances, and a lot of other people, business officers, and many more in the past years, and still do, honour the service personnel from their particular organisation. Many have erected honour boards. One such, the United Grand Lodge of the Order of Oddfellows. They erected a magnificent memorial in Hyde Park, which is still standing and an absolute delight to look at and see if you have that time in that part of the world. The Masons of New South Wales, after the cessations of World War I and hostilities, as the doctor told you a few moments ago, created these schools as a memorial to the care for the sons and daughters of the deceased Masons. The number of those who died was duly recorded, and you will see two references before you. One, this brilliant memorial, which has been supplied by the RSL Sub-Branch and Council, your local people. In 1922, the Masons caused the other, the 365 trees to be planted along the driveway to commemorate the 365 Masons that were killed at the World War I. Each tree had a plaque placed alongside of it with the name of the person that represented. Many of these plaques have been recently vandalised and stolen. A great effort is underway at present to one day restore the name alongside of the appropriate tree. A magnificent marble board, honour board, was also erected in our Grand Lodge vestibule, listing the names and lodges and the number of that lodge of the 365 who died, as shown on this memorial behind me. After World War II, a commemorative plaque was erected in these grounds to honour our fallen fellow pupils, 17 in number, from World War II, and one later on added from the Vietnam conflict, who paid the supreme sacrifice. This plaque is now in the Grand Lodge next to the World War I memorial. It has since been replaced in these grounds by a similar plaque representing the number of those people mentioned, and have been, pardon me, and has been erected by the generosity of the Castle Hill people. It is hoped that this plaque is of nature that it cannot be vandalised as other things have been. The memorial you see before you, unfortunately, is the only public memorial to deceased Masons of World War I or any other war displayed in New South Wales. Today we remember the many but significantly small percentage of our armed forces who have been Masons. And I note that many of our Grand Masters, past and our present Grand Master, have been members of various armed forces, both in Australia and in the British armies, and have served with distinction, several receiving quite significant awards for their heroism. One, General Lord Gowrie, was awarded the Victoria Cross while serving with the British Army before coming to Australia. Many other Masons have received significant awards for services and for bravery during all conflicts, all too numerous to be detailed here this morning. The first Australian to receive the Victoria Cross was Captain Howe. He was a medical doctor during the Boer War. He was a Mason. I recently read with interest that the Victoria Cross, which was petitioned by the Queen Victoria and was designed by the then Deputy Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England, Lord Panmure, and he later became the Grand Master of Scotland. I also recently saw a TV documentary of the last hours of World War I. It was extremely interesting, but very sad. And to hear that the armistice having been signed, the war continued for several hours until 11 a.m. Many, many thousands died in that short, unproductive and determined time, determined by a couple of generals who decided the war should not end. The last man recorded to have been killed was a Canadian soldier, Corporal John Pride, and the time is pathetic to note. It was 10:58 a.m. Field Marshal Cotton, who was the Commander-in-Chief in Ireland, once said, "As a military man, speaking from experience, I can say I've known many soldiers who were Masons, but I've never known a good Mason who was a bad soldier." This morning, we honour the memory of all who have fallen in the service of our country in all wars. We, as Masons, particularly honour the memory of our fallen brother Masons. We, as ex-pupils of these Masonic schools, honour our fallen schoolmates. We will remember them at the going down of the sun, and in the morning we will remember them, lest we forget. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Grand Master and the Masons of New South Wales and the ex-pupils of this school, including myself, I thank you for honouring us by being part of your service this morning. I take this opportunity again to thank you for, and add to any thanks that you may receive, for the magnificent manner you are undertaking and caring for what was our school, was my school, was our home and my home for 4 years. If you give me another moment, something completely aside, I'd like to take the opportunity of welcoming and introducing a friend of mine, a fellow pupil I call him, from the English Masonic schools, and his name is Stephen Blinkhorn. Stand, Stephen, and let us see you. Stephen is the past president of the ex-pupils of England at a particular time. Thank you for coming, Stephen, and we give you welcome. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Neville. I appreciate you introducing Stephen, because I apologise, Stephen, I neglected to. I'm also very interested in what Neville has had to say, because one of the things that drew me to becoming involved with Balcombe Heights Estate was that I attended Northmead High School in the inaugural year that Northmead High School started, 1959. Yes, I'm 74, in case you're working it out. And along the pupils of this school, the primary school, are these buildings here. This was these buildings here, the Turner buildings, were the primary school that was on the estate. But in high school, the students went on to other high schools. I'm not sure if that was the case in your case, Neville. Many of the boys that came here to school that were past residents, then residents of the Masonic schools, some of them were my schoolmates. And all of us at the school referred to them as the Mozzo boys. They were distinct. They wore, because their uniform, that they wore the grey shirts unlike the white shirts. But they were our mates. We looked on, we think of them to this day as our mates, and sometimes I've had the pleasure of being able to catch up with some of them. And one of my other schoolmates is in the audience who remembers some of a couple of them actually, I see. And we do remember these boys with great affection. And that's why I became interested in being part of this, part of the committee here, and continue to do what I do. So I would now like to call Colonel Don Tate to the podium. And we've just changed the proceedings a little bit. I was going to introduce the ambassadors, but I'm going to leave that all to him to do. So thank you.
Thank you very much for coming this morning. I'm sure you'll be interested to hear what these young ambassadors got to say, and they will go through the normal procedure that we do. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone. Does it come out? Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Oh, okay. That's unlucky. Beautiful. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Max Williams, and I am in Year 11 at Northholme Grammar School. So I'll be talking about Changi Prison because of my great-grandfather's involvement in the Second World War. Jeez. On the 15th of February, 1942, the Allied forces surrendered to Imperial Japan, signifying the fall of Singapore. The fall of Singapore saw the loss of 1,789 Australian lives. The surviving 15,000 Australian soldiers were taken prisoner and sent to Changi Prison, the Burma Railway, or the Sandakan airfield. 7,000 of these men would die as prisoners of war. Changi Prison is located on the East Peninsula of Singapore. It held between 2,500 and 15,000 Australians throughout the war. The longer the war continued, the worse the conditions became. At the start of the war, the soldiers had space and some autonomy. But as the war progressed, rations were reduced, prisoners were cramped into smaller spaces, and work parties became more common and ruthless. Rations were rice and sometimes vegetables. Red Cross parcels for the prisoners were often withheld and used by the guards. The guards were notoriously cruel, disrespecting many of the soldiers for the act of surrendering. Sanitary conditions were poor, with men only able to clean themselves when rain came. Therefore, malnutrition was therefore accompanied by disease, especially dysentery. My great-grandfather Adam Anderson was in the 8th Division of the Australian Army Service Corps, and he served between 1940 and 1945. At the young age of 22, newly married, he went to fight the war in the Pacific. He was stationed in Singapore when it fell under the control of the Japanese army and became a prisoner of war at Changi Prison. He spoke of brutality, beatings, and hunger. For 3.5 years, his new wife and family had no contact from him, no knowledge of his health, well-being, or whether he was in fact alive. On the day of victory in the Pacific, he was lined up with other men to be executed, but he lived on to be 90 years of age and was always proud that he served his family in World War II. The courage and heroics of Australian soldiers throughout World War II was endless, from the prisoners of war in Changi to the fighters in Tobruk to the Z Force in Papua New Guinea. We will remember them, lest we forget.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Talia Arthur. I'm a Year 11 student at Castle Hill High School, and today I'm going to be giving a speech about Ellen Savage and women's service in war. Monday 14th, 1943, 10 minutes past 4 in the morning, the Australian hospital ship the Centaur was attacked by a Japanese submarine. 2 torpedoes hit the side of the Centaur, causing it to sink quickly deep into the ocean off the south of Queensland coast. Ellen Savage, who was aboard the ship, was the only nurse to survive. The sinking ship spawned a powerful whirlpool which dragged Ellen deep beneath the water. She found herself being tossed among the debris, which inflicted major injuries. Her ribs were smashed, her nose and palate were broken, and her eardrums were pierced by the sheer pressure of water. Fortunately, Ellen was a powerful swimmer and was able to break free from the vortex. Upon resurfacing, Ellen struggled to construct a makeshift raft from the remaining debris. Despite her trauma, Ellen Savage managed to do something truly amazing. She stumbled upon a larger raft full of wounded men and continued to fulfill her job as a nurse, concealing her injuries to take care of the wounded, and kept up morale within the group for 34 hours while they were stranded at sea. The selfless actions of Ellen Savage inspire me as an individual to embrace my fears and to be the most selfless version of myself. Her sheer act of kindness and determination to serve others remind all people of the service and sacrifice offered willingly by so many women in war, and not only as nurses, but to protect our country and serve its people. It is truly a gift to see how the role of women have evolved in war, from a time where most expected a role of a quiet housewife to now the belief held by so many people that women can and will perform the same tasks, endure the same hardships, and make the same sacrifices. It is an honour to acknowledge the brave and independent women that have come before me, lest we forget.
Good morning. My name is Lillian White. I'm in Year 11 and I go to Crestwood High. Today I will be talking about the Kokoda campaign. The Kokoda campaign was one of the most crucial battles during the World War II. Occurring from July to November 1942 and part of the Pacific Theatre of War, the Kokoda campaign involved Australian soldiers from the 39th Battalion fighting against Japanese forces. The objective of the Japanese attack was to capture Port Moresby via the Kokoda track and thus increase Japanese control by providing a base to attack the Australian mainland. Initially, Japanese forces were successful, allowing their troops to reach within 50 kilometres of Port Moresby, before Australian soldiers changed from being on the defensive to the offensive, resulting in the eventual Allied victory. These soldiers were Australia's last line of defence and successfully fought the Japanese despite the prolonged combat in some of the most challenging terrain on Earth, displaying courage, endurance and mateship. However, it was not without loss. Approximately 625 Australians died, 1,600 were wounded, and over 4,000 afflicted with disease. This story of bravery and success against the odds is an aspect of World War II described by my great-grandfather, Private Bruce King, who fought in Papua New Guinea and lived to tell the tale. Nevertheless, Allied victory in the Kokoda campaign would not have been possible without the assistance of the local Indigenous population. Affectionately dubbed the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels, Papuans living in villages in Kokoda prior to the Second World War lived a traditional existence with extremely minimal contact to the modern world. Their loyalty and service to the Allies acting as scouts and carers for the wounded displays that many more Australians would have died if not for the vital assistance of the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels. The courage demonstrated by Australian forces and contribution of Papua New Guinea's Indigenous population during the Second World War clearly displays the significance of the Kokoda campaign, lest we forget.
Hi, my name's Alejandro Astudillo. I go to Oak Hill and I'll be talking about the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. August 9th, 1945. On a date that lived in the minds of humanity for millennia. From above, death fell and the world forever changed. A blaze of light and a sea of fire destroyed a city and demonstrated that mankind possessed the ability to destroy itself. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a cataclysmic event that changed the course of history. the atomic bombs killed a total of 226,000 men, women, and children. Following the success of the Manhattan Project in July and the surrender of Nazi Germany in May, the US successfully launched 2 atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki to bring the war to a climactic conclusion. One victim of the bombing of Hiroshima, Sadako Sasaki, who developed leukemia 10 years after being exposed to radiation at the bomb site. Sadako Sasaki was a woman who co-founded the movement in which people could construct 1,000 Japanese origami figures to make any wish come true. On her hospital bed, she constructed these figures in the hope that she would recover from an illness. Her death ignited a children's peace movement that spread throughout Japan and transformed the origami into an international symbol of peace. Sadako represents the thousands of Japanese children impacted by the destructive conclusion to the war. After the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the end of the war in the Pacific brought a conclusion to World War II. To the present day, humanity has lived with the ever-present fear of possessing the means to destroy itself. If humanity works together to bridge the gap that divides our nations, we'll be better able to reduce the risk of extinction of the human race and begin a new era of global peace and tranquility, lest we forget.
Good morning again. I'm going to do a very quick presentation, and the presentation is about a World War I soldier and his daughter. While I was the military attaché in the United Kingdom, I was contacted by the War Graves Commission in France that a World War I soldier had been uncovered in a field by a farmer who was ploughing it. With the remains, there was his dog tags, and in a wallet was a lock of hair and a letter. They all belonged to Sergeant J.J. White. This is a remarkable story, so I'm going to abridge it as much as I can because we're starting to run out of time. The remains were in fact discovered, or unearthed if you like, at Bullecourt in France. The soldier, Sergeant J.J. White, had gone missing on the 3rd of May 1917. He was listed as an unknown soldier. He in fact was killed in action on the 3rd of May 1917. Having got this information, I contacted Australia and asked them if they could find some relatives. They did. They found Merle Prophet. She was his daughter. She was 10 months old when her dad died. So I rang her and I said, look, got some bad news or good news, whichever way you'd like to look at it. We found your dad. And I said, I intend to bury him in France at a village called Quaint. Can you come? And she said, yes, I'll be there on the 11th of October and I'll see you then. Defence then organised for her to travel, and I met her at the Gaulle airport in France on the 10th. I then took her to where she was going to be billeted overnight with a French school teacher and wife and children. They all spoke English. I left her there till a bit after lunch, and I called on her to advise her that she was going to be interviewed by the media in France. Not only French media, but world media. We sat down and we discussed the sort of questions that might arise. And she asked me, do you think there are going to be questions not related to my dad? And I said, there possibly will be, but if they are, I will take over and manage those questions on your behalf. At about a bit before 3 o'clock, we drove down to the soldier or the digger's memorial at Bullecourt. She was nervous. We walked up to the memorial and I said to Merle, please read the inscription, hoping that by reading it, she would collect herself a little better than what she was. I said, when you're ready, we'll turn around and we will speak to the television interviewers first up, and there were many of them. At about the time I was going to close the television interviews, One of the interviewers asked her, "What do you think about France's nuclear test in the Pacific? Whether staying completely cool as a cucumber," she pointed over to where the flag that marked where her father had been found, and she said, "Isn't that a great place for my dad to lie for nearly 80 years? At that time, I walked away and took her with me." I was fortunate to have in the UK at the time a number of people on what we call exercise long look and exchange exercise. So I had the people to conduct a full military funeral. I'm just abridging this if you stick with me. I interned the remains in what we call the Quaint Memorial Cemetery near the village of Quaint. At 11 o'clock on the 11th of October, as she had requested. The small lock of hair belonging to JJ's wife and his letter to her that had been preserved in the leather wallet found with his remains were interned with him. We held a wake at the village of Quaint for JJ. And at that wake, I gave Merle, her father's dog tags. The dog tags are a soldier's term for identification discs that they wear around their neck so that anything happens to them, they at least can be identified. She said to me, having got them, "They make me feel as if I really did know my dad," and I think that was very telling. The dog tags are currently, and hopefully will remain, in a museum in Tasmania. Sergeant JJ White's name has been removed off the honour rolls for unknown Australians and has been put on the known Australians. I'm very proud to have met Merle, and for having been able to bury JJ White as a known soldier. The story is much longer, but thank you very much for listening to that. We'll now have the last post. Would you stand, please? Piper. We now have 1 minute silence to remember all those that have given their life in war for this great country of ours. Thank you. We will now have the rouse. Please sit.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
Thank you, Don, and thank you to all these wonderful young people. Jay, Oliver, Saveka, Tali, who have I missed? Lillian, Max. Have I got you all, I hope? So thank you for taking part. As an ex-high school teacher, I'm thrilled to see young people involved. Okay, so I'd like to thank all of our speakers. And we now come to the wreath laying. And again, we have to think about safety. So if we could have, I will call people up one at a time for laying the wreaths. And at the end of when the wreaths have been laid, there are flowers here if any audience members would like to lay a flower at the memorial. However, if I could ask you, please remember to maintain social distancing if you are lining up, and the flower will be handed to you by just one person rather than everybody take their own. So we are trying very hard, Minister Elliott, to make sure that we are doing all the right things. And I'm sorry to have to announce that we aren't able to offer refreshments for the same reasons. However, the coffee van is still up there. If you didn't have a tea or coffee or whatever is available there at the beginning, it will be still there for you to have that sort of refreshment at the end. But again, please remember to keep your distance from each other. Thank you very much. Could I ask the Mayor, first of all, if you could take a wreath? Mickey, where are you? If you could, do you want other councillors there with you? Any councillors who would like to come up as well? So Mickey, can you just start from that end? Yeah. Just the one for all the councillors. There's only one for each. ask Don Tate. And the Anzac ambassadors, if you could come up ready to lay a wreath as well, please. Members of the Balcombe Heights Estate Committee, Nikki and I are here, Gary. Somebody else here? No. Bruce, are you there? Would you like to come up, Bruce? And the members of the Historical Society, could you please come up to lay your wreath? Thank you. Could I ask you all to stand now for the national anthem, and please remember no singing. Thank you so much, all the band, in particular the buglers. Thank you for being here, and that concludes the ceremony, ladies and gentlemen. Please take a seat for just one moment more. I promise only a minute, and that is because I would like to all of you to know that, and I think there was mention of when the William Thompson Masonic School opened. In 2 years' time, it'll be the centenary of the opening. No pressure, councillors. We are expecting a big event. We would really love to see you all here, which hopefully for the ceremony and to have some sort of recognition for the centenary. There was mention made of the other memorial tablets and so on that are on the estate. For those of you who don't know the estate, for those of you who are unfamiliar, I encourage you to walk through. It's a fantastic location, and up about the middle of, if you walk up that road there that goes on that side, you'll come to a 2-storey building, and look down from that 2-storey building, because there is the tablet that commemorates the period of time when the army was on the estate during the Second World War. And further down from that, straight down from that, is the World War II memorial. So this estate has got all of these memorials and this commemorative plaque, not to mention the history that you've heard a little bit about today. So I thought I would just let you know that, and thank you very much, and thank you for being here.